The advertisement promised wealth, status, and security. But when Susannah Aldridge stepped off the dusty stagecoach in Ruby City, Colorado Territory, in 1872, she found nothing but tumbleweeds and broken promises waiting for her. She clutched her carpetbag tighter as the June sun beat down mercilessly on her dark traveling dress. The town sprawled before her like something from a fever dream, with its wooden storefronts and muddy Main Street cutting through the settlement. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks still capped with snow despite the summer heat. Susannah had traveled all the way from Boston, responding to an advertisement placed by one Marcus Thornhill, who claimed to own the largest cattle ranch in Colorado Territory and sought a refined wife to share his fortune. The letter she pulled from her reticule had been worn soft from repeated readings over the past 2 months. In elegant script, Marcus had promised her a life of comfort, a grand ranch house with imported furniture, servants to attend her every need, and the social standing that came with being the wife of one of the wealthiest men in the territory. After years of struggling to make ends meet as a seamstress in Boston following her father's death from consumption, the offer seemed like divine intervention. A man approached from across the street, his expensive suit marking him as someone of means in this rough town. He removed his bowler hat, revealing slicked-back hair and a thin mustache. "Miss Aldridge, I am Marcus Thornhill." Susannah's breath caught. This was her intended, the man whose letters had painted such vivid pictures of their future together. He was handsome enough, perhaps 40 years of age, with calculating blue eyes that swept over her appraisingly. She felt suddenly conscious of the dust on her hem, the way her auburn hair had come loose from its pins during the long journey. "Mr. Thornhill, it is a pleasure to finally meet you in person." She extended her gloved hand. He took it briefly, his touch cold despite the heat. "You are prettier than your photograph suggested. That is fortunate. Come, my carriage is waiting. We have much to discuss before the wedding ceremony this evening." "This evening?" Susannah faltered. "I had hoped for some time to become better acquainted, to perhaps wait a few days." "Nonsense. I am a busy man, Miss Aldridge. I have cattle to manage, business deals to oversee. The ceremony has been arranged, the preacher is waiting, and I see no reason for delay. You came here to marry me, did you not?" Something in his tone sent a chill down her spine despite the oppressive heat. "Yes, of course, but then it is settled. Charles, take her bag." A thin man who had been standing nearby stepped forward to collect her carpetbag. Susannah followed Marcus to an elegant carriage, far finer than anything else she had seen in the town. As they drove through Ruby City, Marcus pointed out various establishments he owned. The saloon, the general store, the livery, even the hotel. His pride in his possessions was evident, but he spoke of them with the same emotional investment one might have in discussing livestock. The ranch house, when they arrived after a 30-minute drive, was indeed grand. 2 stories of whitewashed wood with a wraparound porch, it stood in stark contrast to the rough country surrounding it. Yet as Susannah stepped inside, she found the interior cold and impersonal despite its expensive furnishings. Everything was too perfect, too arranged as if no one actually lived here. "Your room is upstairs, second door on the right. My housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, will help you prepare for the ceremony. We will marry at 6 o'clock. Do not be late." Marcus turned away before she could respond, already calling for one of his ranch hands about some business matter. Susannah climbed the stairs slowly, her earlier excitement curdling into dread. What had she done? She had traveled nearly 2,000 miles to marry a man she did not know, lured by promises of security and comfort. But what good was a grand house if it felt like a mausoleum? Mrs. Chen proved to be a kind Chinese woman in her 50s who helped Susannah wash away the travel dust and dress in the simple white gown she had brought for the wedding. As the woman braided Susannah's hair, she spoke quietly. "Mr. Thornhill is not a cruel man, miss, but he is not a warm one either. He wants a wife the way he wants fine furniture to show his status, but you seem like a good girl. Perhaps you will bring some life to this house." The words did nothing to comfort Susannah. By 5:30, she stood in the parlor in her wedding dress, waiting for the ceremony that would seal her fate. The preacher arrived, a tired-looking man who seemed to have performed this particular service for Marcus before. There were no guests, no celebration, just a business transaction witnessed by a handful of ranch employees who looked uncomfortable in their Sunday clothes. Then the door burst open. A tall man strode in, his boots tracking mud across the expensive carpet. He wore dusty work clothes, a battered hat, and a look of barely contained anger. "Marcus, we need to talk." Now, Marcus's face flushed red. "How dare you barge in here, Preston? I am about to be married. Whatever complaint you have can wait." "No, it cannot wait. You promised my family grazing rights on the north pasture when my father died, in exchange for the water rights we sold you. Now your men are telling me those rights are forfeit, that you own that land outright, and we need to clear out our cattle by week's end." Susannah watched as Marcus's expression turned to ice. "I promised your father, a man who could neither read nor write, certain verbal agreements. Sadly, nothing was put in writing, and when he died 3 years ago, those agreements died with him. The land is mine, legally purchased. Your family's cattle are trespassing." The tall man took a step forward, his hands clenched into fists. Susannah could see now that he was young, perhaps 25 or 26, with dark hair falling over intense brown eyes. A scar cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a dangerous look, but there was something honest in his face, something real that was utterly lacking in Marcus. "You are a liar and a cheat. My father trusted you, and you have waited until he was in his grave to steal from his family. That water rights sale was worth 10 times what you paid, and you know it. The grazing rights were the only thing that made the deal fair. Your father made a poor business decision. That is not my concern. Now get out of my house before I have you removed." The young man's eyes swept the room, landing on Susannah in her wedding dress. Something flickered across his face, surprise mixed with pity. "You are marrying him. Do you know what kind of man he is?" "She knows I am a man of means and standing, which is more than can be said for you, Preston Reynolds. You are nothing but a poor cowboy whose family squandered what little they had. Now remove yourself from my property." Preston Reynolds looked at Susannah for a long moment, and she felt something pass between them, a wordless warning. Then he turned and left, slamming the door behind him hard enough to rattle the windows. "I apologize for that unpleasant interruption," Marcus said smoothly, adjusting his tie. "The man is bitter about his family's reduced circumstances. They were once respectable ranchers, but poor management left them with very little. Now shall we proceed?" The ceremony was brief and joyless. Susannah heard herself speaking the vows, felt the cold gold band slip onto her finger, but it all seemed to be happening to someone else. When Marcus kissed her, it was perfunctory, almost dismissive. She was now Mrs. Marcus Thornhill, one of the wealthiest women in Colorado Territory, and she had never felt more poor in her life. The wedding supper was an elaborate affair, course after course of rich food that Susannah could barely taste. Marcus spoke at length about his business ventures, his plans to expand his holdings, the important people he knew. He never asked her about her journey, her life in Boston, her hopes or dreams. She was simply another acquisition, to be displayed and stored away when not needed. That night, Susannah lay in the large guest bedroom where Mrs. Chen had explained she would sleep. Marcus had informed her curtly that he kept his own chambers and valued his privacy. While she was grateful not to share his bed, the rejection still stung. She stared at the ornate ceiling and wondered if she had made the biggest mistake of her life. The days that followed confirmed her fears. Marcus expected her to be available for social functions, to dress beautifully and play the gracious hostess when he entertained business associates. But he had no interest in her as a person. He forbade her from learning about ranch operations, saying such matters were not suitable for a lady. He did not want her cooking or cleaning, as that was what servants were for. She was to be decorative and silent, a beautiful ornament in his perfect house. 2 weeks into her marriage, Susannah could bear the isolation no longer. After Marcus left for some business in Denver, she asked Mrs. Chen to pack her a basket and saddled one of the gentler horses from the stable. She needed to see something beyond the confining walls of the ranch house, to feel the sun on her face and remember what freedom tasted like. She rode north, following a creek that wound through the rolling grassland. The Rockies dominated the western horizon, their peaks brilliant against the blue sky. Despite her troubles, Susannah could not help but marvel at the raw beauty of this land. It was so different from Boston, so vast and wild and full of possibility. The sound of cattle lowing drew her attention. She crested a small rise and saw a herd of perhaps 50 head grazing in a narrow valley. They were guarded by a single rider who sat tall in his saddle, surveying his domain with the easy confidence of someone who belonged to this land. Preston Reynolds. She recognized him immediately, despite the distance. There was something distinctive about the way he carried himself, a quiet strength that needed no display. As if sensing her presence, he turned and spotted her. For a moment, she considered retreating, but something made her wave instead. He rode toward her, his paint horse picking its way carefully up the slope. When he drew close enough for conversation, he touched the brim of his hat. "Mrs. Thornhill, I did not expect to see you out here. I needed some air. The ranch house is beautiful, but it feels like a prison at times." Understanding flickered in his eyes. "I imagine it does. Marcus likes his possessions where he can see them and control them. That is an unkind thing to say. It is an honest thing to say, but I apologize if I have offended you. That was not my intent." He gestured at her basket. "Were you planning a picnic? There is a nice spot by the creek, under the cottonwoods, if you are looking for a place to rest." She should return to the ranch. She knew that. A married woman had no business spending time alone with another man, especially one with whom her husband had such obvious enmity. But the thought of returning to that cold, empty house made her want to weep. "That sounds lovely. Would you care to join me?" "I have far more food than one person could eat." Preston hesitated, clearly wrestling with the propriety of the situation. Finally, he nodded. "I would be honored. Let me just move the cattle to better grazing and I will meet you there." Susannah found the spot he had described, a pleasant grove of cottonwood trees whose leaves rustled in the breeze. The creek burbled over smooth stones, and wildflowers dotted the grass in splashes of purple and yellow. She spread out the blanket Mrs. Chen had packed and began unpacking the basket's contents: cold chicken, fresh bread, cheese, and apple pie. Preston arrived 20 minutes later, having washed his face and hands in the creek. He removed his hat and sat across from her on the blanket, maintaining a respectful distance. "This is very kind of you, Mrs. Thornhill. Please call me Susannah. I feel we are past formalities given the circumstances." "Then you must call me Preston." He accepted the plate she offered him. "How are you finding Colorado territory?" "It is beautiful," she said honestly. "So different from Boston, where I grew up." The sky seems bigger here and the mountains take my breath away, but I confess I am lonely. Marcus is often away, and when he is home, he has little time for conversation. Preston chewed thoughtfully before responding. Marcus has always been focused on business above all else. Even as a young man, he cared more for profit than people. My father used to say he had a ledger for a heart. You have known him long then, all my life. His father and mine were neighbors, though Marcus Sr. was always the more successful of the two. When he died, he left everything to Marcus, who has spent the last decade building that inheritance into an empire. My own father was less skilled at business. He made some poor decisions, trusted the wrong people. Preston's voice grew bitter. Trusted Marcus, in fact. Susannah set down her chicken. What happened between your families, if you do not mind my asking? Preston was quiet for a long time, staring out at the mountains. 5 years ago, there was a drought. Our creek ran dry, and we were facing the loss of our entire herd. Marcus offered to buy our water rights to the spring on our property for what seemed like a fair price, enough to tide us over. But he also promised that we would retain grazing rights to the north pasture, which has the best grass in the region. My father agreed, they shook hands on it, and Marcus paid him. We survived the drought. But nothing was written down, Susannah said softly. My father could not read or write. He was a good man, a hard worker, but he never had schooling. Marcus knew that. He took advantage of it. After my father died 3 years ago, Marcus waited until this spring to tell us the grazing rights were never part of the deal. Without access to that pasture, our small herd is on poor grazing. We will lose cattle, lose income, and eventually lose the ranch entirely, which I am sure is exactly what Marcus wants. The bitterness in his voice was matched by a deep sadness. Susannah felt her heart ache for him. That is unconscionable. Surely there is something that can be done. Not without proof. And Marcus made sure there would be no proof. He is clever that way, always covering his tracks, always making sure that legally he cannot be challenged. Preston looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt heat rise to her cheeks. I am sorry. You should not have to hear this about your husband. It is not fair to you. I deserve to know the truth about the man I married, Susannah said. And I am beginning to realize that I was deceived just as much as your father was, if in a different way. Marcus promised me a partnership, a marriage of equals. Instead, I am a decoration in his house, expected to look pretty and say nothing. Then we are both victims of his manipulation, Preston said quietly. Though I got the better end of that deal, at least I do not have to live with him. Despite everything, Susannah laughed. It felt good to laugh, to share honest conversation with someone who saw her as a person rather than a possession. They talked for hours, about Boston and her life there, about Preston's childhood on the ranch, about books and dreams and all the small things that make up a life. She learned that he was 26 years old, just 2 years older than herself, that he had a younger sister named Beth who was 16, and a mother who had died when Beth was born. He and his father had raised Beth together, and now that his father was gone, Preston was determined to hold onto their ranch for her sake. She deserves better than to lose her home because Marcus is a greedy bastard, Preston said. Sorry, I should not use such language in front of a lady. I am learning that being a lady is overrated, Susannah replied, and I have heard worse. In fact, I find your honesty refreshing. The sun was sinking toward the mountains when Preston finally stood. I should get back to the cattle, and you should return before your absence is noticed. But thank you, Susannah, for the food and the company. It has been a long time since I enjoyed an afternoon so much. As have I, she said, and meant it. Perhaps we might meet again sometime. I find I have very few friends here. Preston's expression grew troubled. I would like that very much. But if Marcus were to find out, it could make things difficult for you. He is not a kind man when crossed. He is not a kind man regardless, Susannah said. I will not let him make me a prisoner in my own life. Something passed between them then, an understanding, a connection that went beyond words. Preston helped her pack the basket and load it onto her horse, his hands lingering just a moment when they touched hers. Then he was mounting his own horse and riding back toward his cattle, and Susannah was turning toward the Thornhill ranch, already dreading her return. That night, Marcus came home in a foul mood. A business deal in Denver had fallen through, and he needed someone to blame. At dinner, he criticized everything: the temperature of the soup, the way Susannah wore her hair, the fact that she had let the dog into the parlor. His words were like small cuts, designed to wound without leaving visible marks. "You are my wife," he said coldly. "You represent me, and I will not have you appearing slovenly or acting inappropriately. Is that understood?" "Yes, Marcus," she said, keeping her eyes on her plate. "I am going to Leadville tomorrow for business and will be gone for 2 weeks. I expect you to behave properly in my absence. Mrs. Chen will report to me if you do anything unsuitable." Susannah said nothing, but inside, she felt a small flame of rebellion kindle to life. She had been raised to be obedient, to respect her husband and defer to his judgment, but her husband had proven himself unworthy of respect. He was a liar and a cheat who had married her under false pretenses. Why should she continue to honor vows he had already broken through his deception? Over the following weeks, Susannah found excuses to ride out to the north pasture. Sometimes she brought lunch to share with Preston. Other times she simply rode alongside him as he worked his cattle. He taught her about ranching, about reading the weather and understanding cattle behavior, about the delicate balance of grass and water that determined whether a ranch thrived or failed. She taught him about books and music, about the world beyond Colorado territory, about dreams that extended beyond mere survival. They did not speak of the growing feelings between them. To acknowledge them would make them real, would force them to confront the impossible situation they were in. Susannah was a married woman, and no matter how cold and loveless that marriage might be, she was bound by it. Preston was an honorable man who would never ask her to break her vows, but the heart does not always listen to honor or duty. Susannah found herself thinking of Preston constantly, comparing his easy warmth to Marcus's cold calculation, his genuine interest in her thoughts to Marcus's dismissive indifference. When Preston looked at her, she felt seen in a way she never had before. When he laughed at something she said, she felt clever and valued. When their hands accidentally touched, she felt a jolt of electricity that left her breathless. One afternoon in late August, they were sitting by the creek when a sudden rainstorm rolled in from the mountains. Within minutes, they were soaked, rain pouring down in sheets. Preston grabbed her hand and pulled her toward a small line shack he used during winter storms. They burst through the door, laughing and dripping, and Preston immediately set about starting a fire in the small stove. The shack was tiny, barely 12 feet square, with a narrow cot, a table, and 2 chairs. But it was dry and soon growing warm as the fire caught. Preston handed Susannah a blanket. "You should take off your wet things and wrap up in this. I will turn around." She did as he suggested, stripping down to her chemise and draping the blanket around her shoulders. Her dress she hung on a nail near the stove to dry. Preston kept his word, facing the corner until she told him it was safe to turn around. They sat in awkward silence for a few minutes, listening to the rain drum on the roof. Then Preston spoke. "This is not proper. If anyone were to find out you were here with me, unchaperoned, in a state of undress, No one will find out, and I do not care about propriety anymore. Propriety dictated I marry a rich man I did not know, and look where that has gotten me." Preston moved to sit beside her on the cot. "Susannah, I need to tell you something. These past weeks, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has been the happiest I have been since my father died. Maybe the happiest I have ever been, but we cannot keep doing this. It is not fair to you. What if I do not care about fair? What if I would rather have these stolen moments with you than a lifetime of cold comfort with Marcus?" He turned to look at her, his brown eyes intense in the firelight. "Do not say such things. You are married. We both know there is no future for us." "I know," she whispered. "But can we not pretend, just for today, just for this moment, that things are different? That I am free and you are free and we can choose each other?" Preston's resistance crumbled. He reached out and cupped her face in his calloused hand. "If things were different, I would marry you tomorrow. I would spend every day of my life trying to make you happy, trying to be worthy of you." "You are already worthy of me," she said. "More worthy than the man I actually married." He kissed her then, soft and sweet and full of longing. Susannah felt tears streaming down her face, mixing with the rainwater still dripping from her hair. This was what a kiss should feel like, not cold and perfunctory but warm and alive. This was what love felt like, and the tragedy was that she had found it with the one man she could not have. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Preston rested his forehead against hers. "We cannot do this again. It will only make things harder." "I know," she said. "But I do not regret it. No matter what happens, I will never regret this." They sat together until the rain stopped and her dress had dried enough to wear. The ride back to the Thornhill ranch was silent, both of them lost in their own thoughts. At the edge of the property, Preston stopped. "I think it is best if we do not see each other anymore, for both our sakes." Susannah wanted to argue, to beg him to change his mind, but she knew he was right. "I understand. Take care of yourself, Preston Reynolds. And you, Susannah, I hope you find happiness somehow." She rode away without looking back, afraid that if she did, she would turn around and never leave. Marcus returned from Leadville full of plans for a grand party to celebrate some business triumph. For 2 weeks, the house was in chaos as servants prepared, as caterers were hired, as invitations went out to every person of importance within 100 miles. Susannah played her role dutifully, selecting flowers and approving menus and having new dresses fitted. She smiled when required, spoke graciously to Marcus's associates, and pretended her heart was not breaking. The night of the party, she stood beside Marcus in a gown of emerald silk, greeting guests as they arrived. Politicians and cattle barons, merchants and bankers, they all came to curry favor with Marcus Thornhill and see his new bride. She shook hands and made small talk and felt like a hollow shell of herself. Then Preston Reynolds walked through the door. He wore a suit that was old but clean, his hair neatly combed, his boots polished. His sister Beth was with him, a pretty girl with Preston's dark hair and a shy smile. Susannah's heart stopped. Marcus's face went red. "What are you doing here, Reynolds? You were not invited." "I know," Preston said calmly. "But I heard you were entertaining the territorial governor tonight, and I thought he might be interested to know about some of your business practices. About water rights that were obtained through fraud, about land that was stolen from families who could not read the contracts they were signing, about 'get out of my house immediately, or I will have you thrown out.'" The conversation around them had died. Everyone was watching now, fascinated by the confrontation. The territorial governor, a portly man with white whiskers, stepped forward. Now, Marcus, let the young man speak. What is this about fraud?" Marcus's eyes were murderous, but he could not dismiss the accusation in front of so many witnesses, especially not the governor. This man is bitter because his father made poor business decisions. He is trying to blame me for his own family's failures. That is not true, Beth spoke up, her voice shaking but clear. Marcus Thornhill promised my father grazing rights in exchange for our water rights. He took advantage of the fact that my father could not read to cheat him. Now he is trying to drive us off our land entirely. A murmur ran through the crowd. This was not the kind of entertainment they had expected, but it was certainly more interesting than polite conversation about cattle prices. The governor looked at Marcus. Is this true? Of course not. The sale was legitimate and legal. I have documents. Documents my father never saw and could not have read if he had, Preston said. You are a thief, Marcus, and everyone here should know it before they do business with you. Marcus lunged at Preston, but several men held him back. Susannah watched in horror as the evening descended into chaos. Accusations flew. Old grievances were aired, and it became clear that Preston's family was not the only one Marcus had cheated over the years. The governor, clearly displeased by the scene, announced he would be launching an investigation into Marcus's business dealings. As the party broke up in disarray, Susannah found herself face to face with Preston. I am sorry, he said quietly. I know this makes things difficult for you, but I could not let him keep getting away with it. Do not apologize. He deserves to be exposed for what he is. She glanced around to make sure no one was listening. Are you in danger? Marcus is not a forgiving man. I will be fine. I can take care of myself, but you, Susannah, I worry about you. Before she could respond, Marcus grabbed her arm roughly. Get upstairs. Now. She went, her arm aching where he had gripped it. Behind her, she heard him ordering Preston and Beth off his property, threatening legal action and worse. The sound of the door slamming echoed through the house like a gunshot. Marcus did not come to her room that night, which was a mercy. But in the morning, his rage had not cooled. At breakfast, he informed her coldly that she was forbidden to leave the ranch property. You have been indiscreet, spending time with that Reynolds boy. People have talked. I will not have my wife's reputation sullied by association with that family. I have done nothing wrong, Susannah said. You will do as I say, or you will find yourself in a very difficult position. I can make your life quite unpleasant if you defy me. It was not an idle threat. Over the following days, Susannah found herself a prisoner in everything but name. Marcus instructed the stable hands not to saddle a horse for her. He told Mrs. Chen to report on her activities. He made it clear that he owned her, just as he owned everything else on his ranch, and that she would obey or suffer consequences. But the governor's investigation was already underway, and it was uncovering years of shady dealings. Marcus had cheated dozens of people, taking advantage of the illiterate, the desperate, and the trusting. He had forged documents, backdated contracts, and bribed officials. The house of cards he had built was finally collapsing. 3 weeks after the disastrous party, federal marshals arrived at the ranch with a warrant for Marcus's arrest. Susannah watched from the window as they led him away in chains, his face purple with rage, still protesting his innocence. The charges included fraud, theft, and extortion. He would be going to trial and, if convicted, facing years in prison. Suddenly, Susannah found herself in a strange position. As Marcus's wife, she technically had access to his assets, but those assets were being seized as part of the criminal investigation. The Grand Ranch house would likely be sold to compensate his victims. She had no money of her own, no family to return to in Boston, and no prospects. Mrs. Chen found her sitting in the parlor, staring at nothing. What will you do now, miss? I do not know, Susannah admitted. I suppose I will have to find work of some kind. Perhaps I can return to sewing. Or you could stop being stubborn and go to that young man who clearly loves you." Susannah looked up in surprise. "You knew." "Of course I knew. I am old, not blind. The way you looked at each other, the way you smiled after your rides. And he is a good man, that Preston Reynolds, not like your husband." Mrs. Chen's expression softened. "Life is too short to waste on pride, miss. If you love him, tell him, before it is too late." But Susannah hesitated. She was still legally married to Marcus, even if he was in jail, and what did she have to offer Preston? She was penniless, her reputation tarnished by association with Marcus's crimes. He deserved better than a married woman with nothing to her name. 2 days later, a lawyer came to see her. He was a young man from Denver, with kind eyes and a sympathetic manner. "Mrs. Thornhill, I have been hired by several of your husband's victims to help sort out this mess. I want you to know that you are not considered culpable in any way for his crimes. However, the ranch and most of the assets will be liquidated." "I understand," Susannah said. "I expected as much. However, there is something you should know. It appears that your marriage to Marcus may not be legal." Susannah's heart stuttered. "What do you mean?" "Marcus was married once before, 20 years ago in Kansas. There is no record of a divorce. His first wife is still alive, living in Missouri. Which means that when he married you, he was committing bigamy." The room seemed to tilt. "So I am not actually married to him?" "Not legally, no. The marriage is void. You are free, Mrs. Aldridge." He used her maiden name deliberately. "I am sorry to be the bearer of such strange news, but I thought you would want to know immediately." After the lawyer left, Susannah sat in stunned silence. She was free. Free of Marcus, free of the cold marriage, free to choose her own path. The news should have been devastating, but instead, she felt as if a great weight had lifted from her shoulders. She knew what she had to do. The Reynolds ranch was smaller than she had imagined, a modest house and barn set in a pretty valley. Cattle grazed on the hillsides, fewer than Marcus's herds but healthier looking, better cared for. As Susannah rode up the dirt path, she saw Preston working in the corral, training a young horse. He looked up at the sound of hooves and froze. She dismounted and walked toward him, her heart pounding. "Hello, Preston," "Susannah, what are you doing here? If Marcus finds out, Marcus is in jail awaiting trial. And even if he were not, it would not matter. I am not his wife. I never was. The marriage was not legal." She explained about the previous wife, about the bigamy, watching his expression change from confusion to understanding to hope. When she finished, they stood in silence for a long moment. "So you are free," he said finally. "Yes, completely free. I have no money, no prospects, and nowhere to go. I came here because I hoped, that is, I thought perhaps." She faltered, suddenly uncertain. Preston closed the distance between them in 3 long strides. He took her hands in his. "Susannah Aldridge, I have been in love with you since that first afternoon by the creek. I have spent the last 2 months trying to forget you and failing miserably. I do not have wealth or a grand house to offer you. I have a small ranch that is barely profitable, a teenage sister to care for, and a life that is full of hard work and uncertainty. But if you will have me, I promise to spend every day trying to make you happy. I promise to see you, to hear you, to value you as the remarkable woman you are. Will you marry me?" Tears were streaming down Susannah's face. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." He kissed her there in the dusty corral, and it was nothing like the cold, perfunctory kisses Marcus had given her. This was fire and passion and promises of a future built on love rather than lies. When they finally broke apart, both were grinning like fools. Beth came running out of the house, having heard the commotion. When Preston explained, she threw her arms around Susannah. "I am so happy. I have always wanted a sister." They were married a week later in the small church in Ruby City, with half the town in attendance. Many of the same people who had been at Marcus's grand party came, but this time they came out of genuine goodwill rather than obligation. The ceremony was simple, with wildflowers instead of expensive roses, a potluck supper instead of catered courses, and a fiddler instead of a string quartet. And it was perfect. Susannah wore a simple blue dress that Beth had helped her make, and Preston wore his Sunday best. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss they shared was witnessed by tears and cheers from the congregation. This was what a wedding should be, a celebration of love rather than a business transaction. Their wedding night was spent in the small ranch house, in Preston's room, which was now their room. Unlike her first wedding night spent alone and rejected, Susannah fell asleep in her husband's arms, feeling cherished and desired and truly married for the first time. The months that followed were not easy. The ranch required constant work, and money was tight. Susannah learned to cook on a wood stove, to preserve vegetables for winter to help with calving season. Her hands, once soft from a life of leisure in Marcus's house, became calloused and strong. But she had never been happier. Preston was everything Marcus was not. He consulted her on decisions about the ranch, valuing her opinion even when she knew little about cattle. He made her laugh every day. He told her he loved her constantly, not with expensive gifts but with small acts of kindness and devotion. When she struggled with the heavy work, he was patient. When she succeeded at some new task, he was proud. He made her feel like a partner rather than a possession. The governor's investigation concluded with Marcus being convicted on multiple counts of fraud. He was sentenced to 10 years in the territorial prison. His assets were liquidated and distributed among his victims. Preston and Beth received compensation for their stolen water rights, enough to improve their operation significantly. They bought breeding stock, repaired the barn, and even hired a hand to help with the heavy work. One evening in early winter, as they sat by the fire after supper, Preston pulled Susannah into his lap. "Are you happy?" he asked. "More than I ever imagined possible," she said honestly. "When I came to Colorado, I thought I was coming to marry a rich man. I thought wealth would bring me security and contentment, but you have taught me that the richest man is not the one with the most money, but the one with the most love in his life." "You have made me rich beyond measure," Preston said, kissing her forehead. "And I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing a poor cowboy over a wealthy rancher." "You are not poor," Susannah corrected. "You have given me riches money cannot buy. Love, respect, partnership, a real home. These are worth more than all of Marcus's gold." That winter, Susannah discovered she was with child. The news filled the small ranch house with joy and excitement. Beth immediately began knitting baby clothes, and Preston became almost comically protective, insisting Susannah avoid any heavy work. She found his concern endearing, even when it was excessive. On a warm day in May of 1873, Susannah gave birth to a healthy baby boy. They named him Thomas, after Preston's father. Holding her son for the first time, with Preston beside her looking at them both with wonder, Susannah thought about the strange journey that had brought her here. She had responded to an advertisement seeking a mail-order bride for a rich man, expecting to trade her freedom for security. Instead, she had found a love that set her free. Marcus's trial and imprisonment became old news, replaced by new scandals and dramas. The grand ranch house was sold to a family from Boston who had no connection to Marcus's crimes. Ruby City continued to grow, attracting more settlers drawn by the promise of gold and cattle. The Reynolds Ranch prospered modestly, never making them wealthy but providing a comfortable life. Beth grew into a fine young woman and eventually married a schoolteacher who came to Ruby City. Her wedding was held at the ranch, with Susannah and Preston hosting a celebration that lasted well into the night. Watching Beth dance with her new husband, Susannah felt grateful that the girl had not lost her home, that Preston's determination and courage had saved their family legacy. As the years passed, Susannah and Preston had 3 more children, 2 girls and another boy. The small ranch house was expanded to accommodate the growing family, and the once struggling operation became known throughout the territory for its quality cattle and honest dealings. Preston's reputation as a fair and honorable man brought him respect, and eventually he was elected to the territorial legislature, where he worked to protect small ranchers from the kind of predatory practices Marcus had employed. Susannah never regretted leaving behind the grand house and expensive dresses. She found fulfillment in her work on the ranch, in raising her children, in being a true partner to her husband. She taught school part-time in Ruby City, sharing her education with the community. She made friends, real friends who valued her for who she was rather than whose wife she was. Sometimes, on quiet evenings, she would sit on the porch with Preston, watching the sun set behind the mountains, and think about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach so many years ago. That woman had been seeking security and wealth, not understanding that true security came from being loved and valued. She had wanted an easy life, not realizing that the most meaningful life is often one of hard work and shared struggle. Preston seemed to read her thoughts, as he often did. "Any regrets?" he asked, taking her hand. "Not a single one," she said. "Well, perhaps one small one." He looked concerned. "What is that?" "I wish I had met you first. Then I could have saved myself the trouble of ever agreeing to marry Marcus." Preston laughed. "But then you would not have such a dramatic story to tell our grandchildren someday." It was true. Already, Thomas at age 10 loved to hear the story of how his parents met, how a poor cowboy had stolen the heart of a mail-order bride intended for a rich man. The younger children would listen wide-eyed as Preston described bursting into Marcus's house on what was supposed to be his wedding day, or as Susannah told about being trapped in the lined shack during the rainstorm. They made the story funny and romantic, leaving out the pain and fear, turning it into a fairy tale with a happy ending. But it was not a fairy tale, Susannah reflected. It was better than that. It was real. It was a life built on honest work and genuine love, on shared values and mutual respect. It was laughter and tears, success and failure, joy and sorrow all woven together into something beautiful and lasting. In the summer of 1880, Marcus was released from prison, his sentence reduced for good behavior. He left Colorado Territory immediately, and Susannah heard he had gone to California to start over under an assumed name. She felt no animosity toward him anymore, only pity. He had spent his life accumulating wealth and power, never understanding that these things were hollow without love. He had owned a grand house, but had never made it a home. He had taken a wife, but had never learned to be a husband. That fall, Ruby City celebrated Colorado's admission to the Union 4 years prior with a delayed but enthusiastic festival. The Reynolds family attended, all 6 of them piling into the wagon for the trip to town. As they walked through the crowded streets, Susannah noticed people greeting Preston warmly, stopping to chat, asking his advice on various matters. He was respected here, loved even, not for his wealth but for his character. A young woman approached them, perhaps 18 or 19, clearly nervous. "Excuse me, Mrs. Reynolds. I hope I am not being too forward, but I heard your story about how you came here as a mail-order bride." I am in a similar situation. I have received an offer from a man in California, a wealthy man who promises me security. But after hearing what happened to you, I am not sure I should go. What would you advise?" Susannah looked at the girl's anxious face and chose her words carefully. "I would advise you to think carefully about what you truly want from life. Wealth can provide comfort, but it cannot provide happiness. The question you need to ask yourself is not whether this man is rich, but whether he is kind. Does he speak to you with respect? Does he ask about your thoughts and feelings? Does he see you as a person or as a possession? Those are the things that matter in a marriage, not the size of his bank account." The girl nodded slowly. "And if I am not sure? If his letters are polite but distant, if he speaks more of his assets than his character?" "Then perhaps you should look closer to home," Preston interjected gently. "The best husband might not be the richest man far away, but a good man right here who shares your values and your dreams." The girl blushed and thanked them, hurrying away into the crowd. Preston turned to Susannah with a smile. "Do you think we just saved that girl from making a mistake?" "I hope so," Susannah said, "though I cannot regret my own mistake too much since it led me to you." "Everything happens for a reason," Preston agreed. "Though I would still like to believe that somehow, in some way, we would have found each other regardless. Some connections are simply meant to be." As they continued through the festival, children running ahead to see the performers, Susannah reflected on the truth of his words. Perhaps they were meant to be. Perhaps all the pain and disappointment had been necessary to teach her what truly mattered in life. Perhaps she had needed to see the emptiness of Marcus's grand house to appreciate the fullness of Preston's modest home. The years continued to pass in a rhythm of seasons and milestones. Thomas grew tall and strong, taking to ranching naturally. He had his father's integrity and his mother's quick mind, and Susannah knew the ranch would be in good hands when eventually it passed to him. The other children thrived as well, each finding their own path while remaining close to the family. In 1885, Preston was elected to represent their district in the state legislature. It required him to be away in Denver for months at a time, but Susannah managed the ranch capably in his absence, proving herself as skilled a rancher as any man. When Preston returned home between sessions, he would find the operation running smoothly, the books balanced, and new improvements implemented. His pride in her was evident to everyone who saw them together. One evening, as they prepared for bed after a long day of work, Preston said suddenly, "I never thanked you properly." "For what?" Susannah asked, brushing out her hair. "For choosing me. For seeing past my lack of wealth to the man underneath. For taking a chance on a poor cowboy when you could have, I do not know, gone back to Boston or found another wealthy man to marry." Susannah set down her brush and turned to face him. "Preston Reynolds, you foolish man, I did not choose you despite your poverty. I chose you because of your character, because you were honest when Marcus was deceptive, because you were kind when he was cruel, because you saw me as a person when he saw me as property. If you had been the richest man in Colorado, I would have chosen you. If you had been the poorest, I still would have chosen you. Your wealth or lack thereof had nothing to do with it." He pulled her close. "How did I get so lucky?" "We both got lucky," she corrected. "I found a man who understands that true riches have nothing to do with money. And you found a woman who appreciates that." Their life together continued to deepen and strengthen with each passing year. They weathered droughts and harsh winters, market downturns and family illnesses, all the challenges that come with building a life on the land. But they weathered them together, as partners, and each challenge overcome made their bond stronger. Beth and her husband settled on a small farm nearby, and the two families were in constant contact. sharing meals and holidays and the everyday joys and struggles of frontier life. The children grew up as close as siblings, running between the two properties freely. It was the kind of extended family Susannah had dreamed of but never expected to have, bound not by blood alone but by love and shared history. In 1890, Colorado celebrated 18 years of statehood, and Ruby City had grown from a rough frontier town into a proper community with schools, churches, and even a small library that Susannah had helped establish. The Reynolds name was respected throughout the region, associated with integrity and fair dealing. It was a legacy Preston had fought hard to protect, and one he was proud to pass on to his children. One autumn evening, as they sat on the porch watching their grandchildren play in the yard, Preston said, "Do you remember that first day we met, when I burst into Marcus's house, angry and desperate? I remember thinking you were either very brave or very foolish," Susannah said with a smile. "Probably both. But seeing you standing there in your wedding dress about to marry that man, something in me broke. I knew I had to speak up, had to try to stop it somehow, even though I had no right and no reason to interfere. It was not my place. I am glad you did, though. Your courage that day set in motion everything that followed. If you had stayed silent, I would have married Marcus legally, and we would never have had our chance. Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you had never answered that advertisement, if you had stayed in Boston?" Susannah considered the question. "Sometimes, I probably would have continued working as a seamstress, barely making ends meet. Perhaps eventually I would have married someone, some clerk or shopkeeper who needed a wife. I would have had a different life, maybe even a good one. But it would not have been this life. It would not have been our life. And you do not regret it, not even the hard parts, especially not the hard parts," she said firmly. "The hard parts taught me what I was capable of. They showed me that I could be more than a decorative object in a rich man's house. They made me strong, and they made our victories all the sweeter." Preston took her hand, his own now weathered and scarred from decades of ranch work. "When you answered that advertisement, you thought you were trading your freedom for security. But instead, you found something most people spend their whole lives searching for and never find. What is that? True partnership, real love, a life that matters." Susannah squeezed his hand. "We both found that, and that is worth more than all the money in the world." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink and purple, Susannah reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought her to this moment. She had come to Colorado territory seeking the security of wealth, believing that a rich husband would solve all her problems. Instead, she had found that true security came not from money, but from being loved completely, from building a life with someone who saw and valued her authentic self. The poor cowboy had indeed given her riches money could not buy. He had given her respect, partnership, and unwavering love. He had given her a real home instead of a showcase house. He had given her children and grandchildren, a community where she belonged, and a legacy of integrity that would outlast any financial fortune. Most of all, he had given her the freedom to become the woman she was meant to be, unconfined by the expectations and limitations that society had tried to place on her. Looking back, Susannah could see how every difficult moment, every disappointment, had been necessary to bring her to this place. Marcus's deception had been a blessing in disguise, teaching her that wealth without character was worthless. The struggles of building a life with Preston had shown her what she was truly capable of. The contrast between her two marriages had illuminated the difference between being owned and being loved. If she could go back and speak to that frightened young woman stepping off the stagecoach in Ruby City all those years ago, what would she say? that the journey ahead would be difficult but worthwhile, that the rich man she had come to marry was not the one who would make her rich, that true wealth could not be measured in dollars, but in love shared, in honest work, in children raised, in a community built, in a life lived with purpose and integrity. That poor cowboy with nothing but honor and love to offer would prove far wealthier than any man with gold in his pockets and emptiness in his heart. The grandchildren ran up to the porch, breathless and excited, begging for a story before bedtime. Preston and Susannah exchanged a smile. They knew which story the children wanted, the one they never tired of hearing. "Did Grandpa really ride in on a white horse to rescue you?" the youngest asked. "It was a paint horse, actually," Preston corrected with a grin. "And he did not exactly rescue me," Susannah added. "We rescued each other." As they told the story once more, embellishing the details for dramatic effect, making the children laugh and gasp at all the right moments, Susannah felt overwhelming gratitude for the strange and wonderful path her life had taken. She had indeed come to marry a rich man, though not in the way she had expected. Preston Reynolds was rich in all the ways that truly mattered, and in choosing him, in building a life with him, she had become rich too. The mail-order bride who had thought she wanted wealth had discovered something far more valuable. She had found love, true and deep and lasting. She had found purpose and partnership. She had found a home, not just a house, and a family bound by genuine affection rather than obligation. These were riches money could not buy, treasures that no economic downturn could diminish, wealth that would be passed down to future generations not through inheritance, but through example. As the stars emerged in the darkening sky and the children were finally herded off to bed, Preston pulled Susannah close. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, his arms still felt like home. They sat in comfortable silence, listening to the night sounds, the cattle lowing in the distance, the creek babbling over stones, the wind whispering through the grass. "I love you," Preston said simply. "I love you too," Susannah replied. "And I thank God every day that I answered that advertisement, even though it led me to the wrong man first, because it ultimately led me to you." "Everything does happen for a reason," he agreed, "though sometimes we have to wait to see what that reason is." They remained on the porch until the moon rose, silver and full, casting its gentle light over the ranch that had become so much more than just land and cattle. It was a testament to what two people could build when they truly loved each other, when they worked as partners rather than adversaries, when they valued character over currency. Susannah Aldridge had come west seeking a rich man to marry. Instead, she had found Preston Reynolds, a poor cowboy who had given her everything money could not buy. And in the end, that had made all the difference. Their love story was one for the ages, proving that true wealth has nothing to do with bank accounts and everything to do with matters of the heart. In a world that often measured success in material terms, they had found success in each other, and that was the greatest treasure of all.